So, if you haven't heard the news already, it looks like my favorite childhood game is coming back, which is Crash Bandicoot. They're bringing Crash Bandicoot back on the PS4, and it's going to be called the Crash Bandicoot Sane Trilogy, and it's going to include the first three games of the series, which is Crash Bandicoot 1, Crash Bandicoot 2, Cortex Strikes Back, and Crash Bandicoot 3, Warped, and that's very good news because those were actually the very first games I ever played in my whole entire life growing up. So that's very exciting news. Sure, we have gotten some Crash Bandicoots in the past, but I really wasn't a fan of the later Crash Bandicoots, especially some of the new ones were like Crash of the Titans, where he's on Titans and he's like fighting people. I just like the typical Crash Bandicoot where you're jumping on boxes, spinning enemies, getting Wampa fruits, the Uka Uka mask. Those were the very first Crashes that were just flat out great. Honestly, if you went back today and played the original one on the PS1, it does hold up very well in terms of the graphics. There's nothing really wrong with it. The only thing I would say that's wrong with it, if you went back to play Crash Bandicoot now instead of back then, is that it's not really a side scroller like original platformer, and it's not an open world 3D platformer. It's kind of a gap between those two, maybe 2.5D. So it's kind of like you're controlling Crash. It is in a linear path, so you are stuck to one path. But the thing is, though, it is 3D, so it's kind of weird when you play. You'll understand what I'm talking about. That the games are, it's not really a open world 3D platformer or a standard 2D platformer. It is a 2.5D, so you'll understand when you play the game. But overall, this is exciting news that gives hope to maybe we'll get new games in this series. They still care about Crash Bandicoot, and if you didn't know something about Crash Bandicoot, actually, it was developed by Naughty Dog. Yes, the same company who actually made Uncharted and The Last of Us. They were actually making platformers back in the day. Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter on the PS2 were just some good times, and you can really see how much Naughty Dog has really grown up as a company making those Uncharted and The Last of Us. They really matured as a company very, very well, and I'm just very excited. Honestly, I hope they do bring other games from the franchise over, and if you didn't know something, this is not just a little game, at least for Sony. Back in the 90s, Sony really made a big deal about Crash Bandicoot. He had commercials on the TV when a guy would dress up as the Crash Bandicoot, and it's just plain out insane. If you want to see some of those commercials, I will link them down in the description if you want to check out some videos from the 90s of Crash Bandicoot. So you can see how they were really trying to market it as their mascot of Sony, and they were trying to rival Nintendo. Like, you know, of course, Nintendo has Mario, so they were trying to market Crash Bandicoot as their own mascot, which is just insane. So you can see how much Sony pretty much cared about Crash Bandicoot, and it's just nice. A lot of more people are going to be able to play Crash Bandicoot. If you're a big Sony fan and you don't know what Crash Bandicoot is, now's the time you'll finally get to play it and know what Crash Bandicoot is, because it's kind of, I guess, Sony's mascot in the 90s, but I really don't know what happened to Crash Bandicoot after the 90s. They kind of stopped really caring about them, and what now? Sony really doesn't have that staple like mascot like Nintendo does. They stopped really caring about it. Honestly, most of the games in on the PS1 were great, and if you also didn't know, they went as far as to copy some of the staples of the Mario series. We even got a kart racer in the Crash Bandicoot series on the PS1 called CTR Crash Team Racing, and we also got a Mario Party-esque ripoff too on the PS1, which is called Crash Bash. Now, Crash Bash wasn't actually made by the same company, Naughty Dog. It was made by a different company. I can't remember, but that one's not made by the same company. But as you can see, they really wanted to try to brand him as much as possible and try to make him their staple. And you can see by ripping off some of their other franchises, they did that. But no, those games are actually really great. So if they were to remake CTR or Crash Bash, I would actually be happy. Some of the games on the PS2 I actually really do enjoy as well. They have Crash Wrath of Cortex, and they have Crash Twin Sanity, and they also have another kart racer on the PS2. But the platformers on the PS2, I think Twin Sanity and Wrath of Cortex, I did actually enjoy to some extent. But then after that, the series just kept going downhill and downhill and downhill, where the gameplay was not the same as the original, and that's just too unfortunate. So hopefully by now, maybe we'll get more remakes, or we'll get a brand new game in the franchise, and they'll go back to the basics of the series. They won't make it some weird fighting game where Crash is punching enemies and whatnot. That's just not like Crash. It's just really bizarre and really weird. I did not like those games. Unfortunately, I don't know who owns the licensing, because the weird thing about the Crash series is the licensing's been changed from different companies, and I don't think Naughty Dog owns it anymore. I think Activision actually owns the rights to Crash. Well, there was one good thing a couple of months ago when the new Skylanders Imagination came out. Crash Bandicoot was actually in the game, so they did still care about it. And yeah, I'm pretty sure Activision does own the rights to Crash Bandicoot. That's why he was in Skylanders Imagination. But anyway, guys, that's just me talking about Crash Insane Trilogy. Anyway, guys, peace out. I'll see you guys later in my next video. I'm out, guys.